I will say this, so far, in the meetings that I've had, of which there have been two, the tone has been businesslike. It has not been adversarial. It has been very much focused on things we can get done together. There hasn't been a lot of detailed discussion of some of the more controversial things you talked about. Certainly after the first meeting, one thing that happened that was not helpful to the establishment of a kind of a predictable relationship was the change unilaterally to the size of the City Council. I mean, that happened in a way that was, to me, completely unacceptable, but you have to sort of try to remember that there are many other chapters we have to do. But two things. Number one, we should not have to go to Queen's Park to implement photo radar in school zones. We should not have to go to Queen's Park to implement traffic wardens that we think are people that can help direct traffic in a busy city. We have a responsible enough, duly elected government and a staff here that are quite capable of making those decisions for the people of Toronto and not having to have oversight of that by the province. Then the second part is finances, and this applies to all three levels of government. There needs to be a fundamental reconsideration because a lot of the demand for service expansion for the 80% of Canadians who live in cities, leave alone the 3 million people who live here, is delivered by, conceived by cities, and yet the cities have only the revenue that comes essentially from property taxes and then other kinds of transfer payments the other governments decide they're going to convey upon us. And so I just think there needs to be a reconsideration of all that, and I'd be quite satisfied if the result of it was that those governments gave a much more guaranteed revenue stream decided on some basis or other, as they've started to do with things like transit, so that we can make our plans knowing we'll have their support from the levels of government that take in far more money because they have income taxes and sales taxes and the like. I'm not sitting around suggesting new taxes. I am suggesting the ones that are collected should find their way to cities on a more equitable basis, simply because the cities have the burden of actually delivering the transit, delivering the policing, delivering the housing and so forth, and that's where that money is needed. That as we speak, there are some 150 new police officers in a class that are being hired. In the process they go through being trained, they'll be on the streets early next year. We will hire again next year in a similar or greater number. We're now looking at greater use of what are called special constables, so that we can have them go and take the reports on a break and enter, and thus free up the time of a police officer who might spend hours at a house, writing down the inventory and all this kind of stuff. And so we're in the midst of a lot of changes that are designed to have shorter term positive impact on communities, including neighborhood policing. And the neighborhood policing, the great advantage to that will be that when a police officer is required, as this program will require, that they stay in the same neighborhood for 4 years, and that they will then walk down the street after a relatively short period of time and they'll say, "Hi, John," and the police officer will say, "Hi, Antonella," and they will actually get to know each other and they will develop more of a trust with each other, but they'll have a presence in those neighborhoods. And the presence of police officers, as Mr. Blair said today, it just means a lot almost by itself. So I think there's a variety of things we're doing, and we've said all the way along, and I haven't heard anybody else tell me a magic solution they had that falls outside of these basic categories. Support the police by hiring and doing other things to supply them with the proper technology and resources. Change some of the laws, and there's a debate obviously about exactly how those laws might be changed to reduce the supply of guns. And then thirdly, and in a way most importantly, support these kids and help them to stay on a path that would never have them thinking of picking up a gun. So if we don't have the guns sitting on the table somewhere, or somebody's handing it to them to the same extent, and we don't have anybody willing to take them, I think we'll find that the crime numbers will respond accordingly. And I'm optimistic that is going to happen as soon as next year, just because we've been doing some of these things. We didn't just start doing them today, Apple. They're very specifically targeted at some of those places where there has been a greater level of gang and criminal activity. And that's what, and the same with Mark Saunders and the view he has about deploying police differently over time, which is you have the police where needed, when needed. And you're careful not to say that a presence of more police officers is by itself going to solve the problem. Sometimes that can be actually counterproductive, but that you're going to make sure that you have police resources, investments in the communities, and things like that done in a way that reflects the fact that some of that activity has become concentrated. But I think it is as much a factor of socioeconomic circumstances as it is anything else, and that's why we have to attack the broader issues of connecting those areas to transit, making sure the kids in those areas feel they have a chance to get some of the jobs that are clearly being created downtown. We announced 600 new jobs at Amazon. Premier Ford and I did the other day with them. The company announced that we were there to sort of commend them for their wise decision to invest in Toronto. I think a lot of kids in Rexdale and Malvern, at the two sort of opposite ends of the city, northeast and northwest, would think those jobs might as well have been created on the moon in terms of their accessibility to those jobs. And so that's what we have to fix, is through transit, through taking job fairs up there, through even the things like homework clubs that we talked about today to make sure the kids stay in school. We've got to make sure they have access to that opportunity, because the best thing that is going to remedy or provide at least a great opportunity and hope for those kids is a good job and access to a good job, and making sure they don't drop out of school so they can't get a good job. And that's what these announcements today were all about. But they go hand in hand with more police officers and with the changes to the law and things like that to generally try and address the evolving gang activity that the chief also referred to.